Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Chancellor, Phillip Hammond, has rejected claims there are millions living in dire poverty in Britain. Responding to questions about his legacy and track record, Mr Hammond said he accepted that some people were struggling, but that the government had worked to tackle the causes of poverty. Last month, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Poverty published a report in which he accused the government of plunging millions into poverty, in some instances with tragic consequences, through its programme of austerity. In a substantial interview for this programme, Mr Hammond also warned MPs vying to be the next Prime Minister they risked becoming Theresa May Mark II unless they accepted the realities of Brexit and discussed what he calls his robust exchanges with the Prime Minister. At his last conference speech, the Chancellor talked of the privilege of our time in office. With heads held high, we built, he said, a better Britain. I asked him if after 3 years at the helm, he really did feel he'd built a better Britain.
Yes, it is, of course, because we have record levels of employment, record low unemployment. We've rebuilt the public finances so that we now have a deficit down at 1.1% of GDP last year, and our public debt falling sustainably for the first time in a generation. Those are remarkable achievements, and now we're building on them through increases in the national living wage, a programme of investment in our economy that we haven't seen for 40 years in terms of capital spending to prepare Britain for the challenges of the future.
You rebuilt public finances, and yet the benefit freeze will have swept 400,000 people into poverty by 2020. That's the IFS believing 10 million families will lose an average £420 a year. Child poverty, as you know, is headed to increase by 6% to a record high. 14 million people living in poverty, that's according to the UN rapporteur. The schools budget is in crisis. Half of all teachers admit to having to buy food and clothes and soap to help poorer pupils. And the food bank charity, the Trussell Trust, report a 19% annual increase, 52% if you count the areas where universal credit has been rolled out. So I would put it to you that your priorities have been wrong.
No, well, I wouldn't accept that. The schools budget, for example, is at a record high, £43 billion.
Why are teachers having to take money out of their whole pockets then to fund pupils' food and clothes?
Forward projections of poverty are notoriously unreliable. What I can tell you is that child poverty today is lower than it was in 2010. Now, that is not to be complacent. We've gone through a period when we have had to make some very, very difficult decisions, and we have had a freeze on benefits. That will end next year. Benefits will start to rise in line with the cost of living.
You've got nearly 20% annual increase in people's use of food banks over the last year. That's not a projection, that's a reality.
The key to sustainably improving people's standards of living is getting them into work and then moving them up the income curve by increasing their skills and getting them to move into better paid jobs. And we've got a remarkable track record on doing that.
Do you accept, however, that Jeremy Corbyn has moved the dial on this, that he has been more alive to more people's genuine worries about public services, even if you think he's dangerous or if you think he's insubstantial, whatever your political view of him, he has recognised the inequality, he's recognised the dire poverty that a lot of people in this country face, and he's speaking to them?
Well, first of all, I reject the idea that there are vast numbers of people facing dire poverty in this country.
14 million, according to the UN rapporteur.
I don't accept the UN rapporteur's report at all. I think that's a nonsense. Look around you. That is not what we see in this country. Of course, there are people struggling with the cost of living.
I beg to differ. We're in Downing Street. So if I look around me, I'm not going to see a lot of poverty. But if I went to other parts of the country, I would see that poverty. We do see that poverty.
Of course, people are struggling with the cost of living. I understand that. But the point here is that we're addressing these things through getting to the root causes. Now, you asked me about Jeremy Corbyn. I do think Jeremy Corbyn's dangerous. But I've said many times, including last week at my speech at the Resolution Foundation, that the populists, and Jeremy Corbyn's a populist, don't have the answers, but they're good at identifying the problems. And the problem we've got is that for many people, the theory of how a market economy is supposed to work in generating and distributing wealth is at odds with the practice that they're experiencing. And that is why we have got to ensure, those of us who believe that a market economy is the way to deliver a prosperous future for Britain. We have got to make sure that that market economy is working in the way the textbooks tell us it will work, to deliver through competition the best deal for consumers and to distribute wealth in a way that is fair. And to the extent that it's not working, we've got to evolve the system.
We'll see Theresa May step down on Friday as leader of the party. Is your plan to step down when she goes?
I haven't made a decision about that yet. I'm waiting to see how the lineup looks for the leadership contest. It's a crowded field, as you will have noticed. The important thing to me is that the things that I believe in as important for the future and the things that I think the Conservative Party has to be able to offer the British people are represented in the leading candidates.
You still haven't ruled yourself out from standing?
Look, it's not my intention to stand in this leadership election. I know that I'm a divisive figure within the party because I've always been very clear and open about
your own
my
staff
view
don't even know if you're going to be standing to be
Brexit.
PM, though.
Well, that's good. It shows my security is good. But what I've said before, and I'll say again today, is the important thing for me is not about the individual. It's about the set of values and principles and the approach to dealing with Brexit, to maintaining fiscal responsibility and to the vision for the future of this country.
Let's work out what that Brexit strategy is then. Presumably there are many that you have confidently ruled out. Anyone who said that they will leave without a deal on October the 31st?
Yes, so it's very important for me that candidates articulate a Brexit strategy that is real, that could be delivered. And leaving on October 31st with or without a deal is not a practical proposition now, because we have taken a chunk of time out for this process. And it would not be possible to leave with a deal, because it wouldn't be possible to legislate in time. And it would not be possible to leave without a deal, because Parliament isn't going to allow it.
Andrew Leadsome's talking about a managed exit or managed no deal. Could you embrace that as a Brexit strategy?
Well, it isn't going to happen. Andrea Leadsom has been presenting this idea for quite a long time. The problem with it is that the Europeans will not engage with a proposal that does not address their principled concerns about the Irish border and includes the Irish backstop.
What about a time-limited backstop of maybe 5 years as discussed with the EU? That was Matt Hancock's
and
Brexit
as rejected
strategy.
by the EU.
So that's
obviously a time-limited backstop would have been ideal, but Emily, with the greatest respect, if we could have got a time-limited backstop or an exit from the backstop, Theresa May wouldn't be standing down as Prime Minister. The withdrawal agreement bill would be going through Parliament now and everything would be rosy.
Let's try another extension after October to find a better deal or a better Brexit strategy. I think that's the Michael Gove line. Is that something that you could conceive?
Well, my challenge to all the candidates is explain to me how you will avoid becoming Theresa May Mark II, stuck in a holding pattern, and an extension of time to try to renegotiate when the EU have already said they've finished the negotiation and indeed they've disbanded their negotiating team, strikes me as a not very auspicious policy. The debate that we're having now is here. The debate is here in the UK about whether we are going to sign the withdrawal agreement or not, and what kind of future relationship we then want to have. Because the European Union is willing to talk to us about the shape of the future relationship, the political declaration. That is open for discussion.
Could you support somebody, say, who has ruled out no deal but has smoked opium?
To be honest, I personally don't really care what people have done in the past. I care about their strategic approach to Britain's future.
Some Tory candidates suggest that no deal is still better than no Brexit.
We as Democrats, we as parliamentarians, should be absolutely clear that we can't tolerate either of those outcomes. We have a solemn obligation to find a solution which avoids both of those outcomes, and that means, even at this late stage, a deal. It means people in Parliament having to stop pontificating, get off their high horses and understand that we will all have to give up something to get to a deal that will work. We will all be grumpy about it, we'll all be dissatisfied, but in many ways that is the only way forward for the country.
You're going to be attending the state banquet tonight with Donald Trump, who suggested the next PM needs to send Nigel Farage in to do business with Brussels, pursue a no-deal Brexit if the EU don't give us what we want, and has endorsed Boris Johnson. Your response?
That would not be my advice.
Which bit of it?
All of it.
But might President Trump be correct when he throws his weight behind Boris Johnson that that is the Conservatives' best chance now of securing a deal with America, something with Europe, and fending off the threat of both Jeremy Corbyn and Nigel Farage? For you as a party, he's your best bet. Well,
of course, colleagues, when they're voting in Parliament, and then members of the party when they're voting in the country, will want to think about the strategy that the different candidates have put forward for managing Brexit, but they will also be looking at the candidates in terms of their ability to beat Jeremy Corbyn in a general election. That's an essential characteristic for a leader of the Conservative Party. So of course that will influence thinking in the election.
You prefer to have Boris Johnson rather than Jeremy Corbyn, presumably?
Of course.
So would you say that there is a very high likelihood that Boris Johnson should be the next PM because he's the Conservatives' best weapon?
Well, I'm clear that Boris Johnson is the favourite. Look at the bookies' odds at the moment. He's very well regarded by our membership. I disagree with his approach to the Brexit problem. He hasn't, in my view, yet set out a realistic solution to managing Brexit. Saying we'll leave on the 31st of October, deal or no deal, is not an answer, because we won't leave either with a proper deal or with no deal on the 31st of October. So candidates need to be honest about the situation we're in.
Well, that was Phillip Hammond. Our political editor Nick Waters here. Now, there's a lot to unpick from that, not least his sort of iteration of the Brexit strategies as espoused by his colleagues. Let's start with the line on poverty, Nick. What do you make of that?
Well, poverty is always a difficult issue for the Tories. In recent decades, they've really struggled with that challenge of how to navigate their way around marrying economic efficiency with social justice. And the Conservatives say, look, we're the party of social reform in the 19th century and in the last century, particularly in the post-war period. But then they go on and say you cannot achieve any of that if you don't achieve economic success. And Phillip Hammond is very much in that tradition. But there's been quite a reaction to your interview with him. John McDonnell accused him of brutal complacency and said that he should consider his position. And I found a mixed reaction amongst Conservative MPs.
I think Phillip Hammond is talking about a Dickensian type poverty. Of course, thank goodness, for the most part, we have eliminated in our country, except, of course, for the tragedy of homelessness that you see increasingly on our streets. But what I think he doesn't take into account are the kind of people I see in my constituency day after day who are working, who are struggling. It's a striver's poverty, if you like. So the single parent who is working but doesn't turn on electricity till 6 o'clock in the evening.
Of course, I also see day to day in Barking, in Lewisham, people who are struggling on their incomes. So there is a real issue in our country. I think what Phillip is trying to say is that when we talk about poverty in Britain, we also have to be serious and respectful that we're talking about relative poverty in Britain. We're not trying to compare it to the kind of situations that he saw as a Foreign Secretary.
So the Britain that you're seeing on this tour is a rather different Britain to the Britain that Phillip Hammond is seeing?
No, absolutely not. I have enormous admiration for Phillip Hammond, and I'm actually proud to be part of the same party as him.
Nick, talk to me a little bit about the Brexit strategies, because Hammond sort of went through sort of whacking each of them in turn, saying the Leadsom model doesn't work, the Matt Hancock model doesn't work, the Gove model doesn't work, the Boris Johnson model doesn't work. Where does it leave us then?
Well, I think you got an exclusive insight into what it's like in Cabinet, where Phillip Hammond basically goes around trashing absolutely everyone and often using quite stinging language. And there was stinging language about Theresa May saying to the candidates, don't be Theresa May Mark II stuck in a holding pattern. But at the same time, he was actually saying that Theresa May has the only way, which is a deal, because he said that the only way you can marry the economics of Brexit, which is a soft landing, with the politics of Brexit, which is to deliver the referendum, is her deal.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Nick Watt.